The freeze is thawed and the IPO window is open. It's time to count down the top 10 IPOs we're anticipating for the second half of 2025. We'll also look at some IPO Crickets and preview what's in the pipeline for 2026. Welcome to the Access IPOs podcast, where we explore opportunities to invest in the world's most innovative and disruptive pre-IPO companies. I'm Craig Stevens, founder of AccessIPOs.com, and about twice a year, I run through the most likely upcoming IPOs in the pipeline. And I do this because that's what people are interested in. When you see an IPO that is successful, the first thing that comes to mind is like, well, what's next? What's the next IPO that I can try to participate in? At the beginning of the year, I shared my top 10, and 4 of those 10 have completed their IPOs so far. And those were CoreWeave, Venture Global, Chime, and Circle. Circle we've talked about a lot because it's been one of the best IPOs in recent memory. And there's a few on that list that have disappeared, one being Turo. Turo has said that they've abandoned their IPO plans. And then a few of the companies on the list today for the second half of 2025 will look familiar going back to that January newsletter I sent out. And if you're not on my newsletter, head over to accessipos.com and sign up. You get an email once a week, and you'll never miss a podcast, and you'll never miss a new IPO radar company on our watch list. All right, so I have a top 10 for 2025, for the second half of 2025. Let's jump right into the list. The first one is StubHub. Now, StubHub filed for an IPO on March 21st of 2025, and they actually were talking about an IPO in 2024. We got an article from the Wall Street Journal sometime in July of last year that they were going to IPO in September, and it turns out they pulled their IPO because of choppy market conditions. I've mentioned this a lot of times because it's kind of silly to think back that 2024 was choppy, but I guess they needed an excuse to not move forward with the IPO. They filed in March of this year, and of course, the tariff announcement impacted that filing. The tariff announcement on April 2nd, some people call it Liberation Day or the tariff turmoil, that impacted a lot of IPOs in the pipeline. The Wall Street Journal reported a couple days later that StubHub and Klarna were delaying their IPOs. And they also talked about Chime delaying their IPO filing, which they did, but they ended up coming around and launching their IPO a few weeks ago. So StubHub, they delayed once in 2024. They postponed it again in 2025 because of the tariff announcement. And I guess the CEO needed to tell people why so that he didn't look delusional. And so a Wall Street Journal article came out on May 23rd featuring the StubHub CEO saying he isn't delusional. Here's why he hasn't IPO'd yet. But in that article, they specifically say that sources are telling them that the company is likely to IPO in late June or early July. Here we are, it's late June, going into early July, and we still don't have the term set for the StubHub IPO. And the fact that the CEO was willing to go to the Wall Street Journal and make this big PR push or whatever it was to let people know that they still plan to IPO, I think is telling that this thing is going to happen. The bankers are obviously driving this decision and when it's going to happen. Those bankers being Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, decided to push off StubHub's long-planned IPO a second time. StubHub, of course, is the ticketing website, has lots of customers, so it would be nice if they invited retail investors to invest, especially their customers, to participate in the IPO. We don't know if that's going to happen. We're hoping that happens when we get an updated filing, which could happen any day now. I should have mentioned this at the start, but today is Thursday, the 26th, and everything I'm talking about is based on that date. Any day now, we could get a new filing from a new company or an updated filing from another company or news leaks from a reporter telling us something new. So we're always monitoring this information. On my website, go to the homepage, and in the menu, there's an Upcoming IPOs page. And this is where I'm getting this information from. I update that almost every day. So if you want to get the latest list of upcoming IPOs, that's the best resource, especially the top 10. I make sure that that's really in line with what is happening. So StubHub, they said late June, early July, the market's near all-time highs or at all-time highs. I don't think it's choppy anymore. We've seen plenty of IPOs move forward. It's time for StubHub to do that. They simply need to update the terms and kick off the roadshow, which could happen any day now. Number 2 on the list is Klarna. Klarna is a fintech known for its buy now, pay later, but it's really making a push toward being a broader fintech or a broader banking services company. It's a Swedish-based company, but a lot of their business is in the U.S., and they plan to IPO in the U.S. They filed their F1 filing, that's F for foreign, on March 14th, 2025 this year, but they never updated the terms of the deal. So usually you get the first filing, and then you wait a few weeks, and then they update the terms with how many shares they're going to offer and a price range. And that kicks off the IPO roadshow. It's also when online brokers start offering IPO access. So Klarna never got to that point because on April 2nd, the tariff announcement and the Wall Street Journal reported on it. So you're going to see this pattern of events that it's going to repeat a few times here. Now we're waiting for some news on Klarna, and really the only Klarna news we're getting is the CEO talking about how they use AI to not hire people, and it's kind of a broken record. We use AI to become more efficient, and they got a lot of PR out of that, but what we're looking for is that updated filing to let us know what the terms of the IPO are, and we're expecting around a $15 billion market valuation for this IPO. So the same scoop, the same article that talked about Klarna, also is where we learned about the StubHub pause, and they talked about Circle and Chime, and those two have moved forward. So I don't know what's holding back Klarna and StubHub for that matter. Probably bankers advising that's what they're supposed to do, but at all-time highs and the window being open and successful IPOs like CoreWeave, eToro, Chime, Hinge Health, and Circle, with those in the rearview mirror, it's hard to understand what's going on with these companies that have said they're going to IPO but haven't done it yet and have even filed for it. So Klarna, certainly at the top of our list because we really want to see it go. It's going to help launch more fintechs into their IPOs. And they said they're going to IPO, so we want to see it. Klarna, number 2 on our list. Moving on to number 3, another fintech that seems a little more convincing right now that they're going to move forward with their IPO. And who can blame them with the way that Circle was received by the crypto community in Wall Street? Number 3 is Gemini. Of course, the Winklevoss twins, famous for claiming Facebook, starting Facebook, and going through the lawsuit. They jumped on the crypto bandwagon very early. Big advocates of Bitcoin, and they started their own exchange. It's called Gemini. They also have a Bitcoin credit card. And these guys, the Winklevoss twins, know an opportunity when they see one, and they know that the IPO window is open. It's an opportunity for them to raise money, and it's an opportunity for crypto enthusiasts to invest and possibly run up the price similar to the way we've seen with Circle. They seem to be moving quickly. On February 6th, there was a report that said crypto exchange Gemini is said to weigh IPO. And then just a month later, we got a report that says the Winklevoss twins and Gemini have filed confidentially for an IPO. My interpretation of this is these guys want to have a public company someday. They want Gemini to be public. They want their users to be able to invest in the company. At least that's my hope, that they're going to offer IPO shares to their customers. And if they want this to be a public company, the perception is the current administration is much friendlier to cryptocurrency companies than the previous administration. And the next administration or Congress may not be as friendly toward crypto and cryptocurrency and the ecosystem. So these guys see an opportunity to do it now, especially after Circle. You can't blame them for wanting to push this company into the public markets, and there aren't a lot of crypto pure play companies, and this certainly would be one of them. So watch for the Gemini IPO before the end of the year. Number 4 on our list is Figma. Figma is a software platform for collaborative design and application development. It's a SaaS, software as a service. Has some very top-tier venture capital investors. They include Index Ventures, Andreessen Horowitz, Greylock, Kleiner Perkins, Sequoia, Founders Fund, Iconic, some of the top names in venture capital. And these guys were looking for an exit in 2023. Adobe made an offer for Figma at $20 billion valuation. And by the end of 2023 in December, they abandoned the deal. So Figma was forced to remain an independent company. And it's a similar situation that happened with Plaid when Visa tried to take over Plaid, and that deal fell through. Plaid is still private, and they don't seem to be moving toward an IPO. Figma seems to have shifted gears right away. It started moving toward becoming a public company. They are IPO ready. There was a big New York Times article and on March 7th that said Figma is in talks with bankers to explore an IPO this year. And then April 15th, we got an article that said Figma has filed confidentially. In fact, they put that on their own website. And so when you see that on their own website, you know they mean business. They want people to know about this deal. And then another month later, an article came out that said Morgan Stanley is leading the IPO. That was in May. Usually we get the underwriter or the bank who's leading the IPO. Usually we get that story first. In this case, they filed confidentially, and then we learned later that Morgan Stanley was leading the deal. Once these companies file confidentially, it's just a matter of the SEC qualifying the filing, and sometimes they give feedback. They usually give feedback to the issuers. They update the S1 filing, and when it's good to go, that's when they release it to the public. So April 15th, they filed confidentially. We're 2 months past that, and we're not hearing a lot of news other than that Morgan Stanley deal. So got the New York Times saying 2025 confidential filing looks pretty good for this year. The Adobe takeover was around a $20 billion valuation, and looking at Caplight and other pre-IPO secondary marketplaces, that $20 billion valuation looks pretty good for Figma right now. They did do a tender offer about a year ago to help alleviate some of the employee desire to liquidate some of their wealth. They did that tender at $12.5 billion. I'm sure they have no regrets, but if this IPO comes out at $20 billion, there's going to be a lot of happy investors, and retail investors in the public markets are going to be happy because it's another new company, a new SaaS that we can add to our portfolios. Moving on to number 5 is Navan. Navan is a travel and corporate expense company. It competes with Ramp and Brex. Navan used to be TripActions. I'm not sure Navan is a better name than TripActions. TripActions is a little easier to say. Navan, not so much. If this was a normal week on the podcast, Navan would be part of our IPO radar segment because this week, on June 20th, we got a report that Navan has filed confidentially for an IPO. They were talking about an IPO in 2024, never happened. In fact, TripActions actually filed confidentially for an IPO in September of 2022. So this company has been thinking about this for a long time. They hired a bank in May, and that bank is Goldman Sachs. Goldman Sachs has seemed to be a little bit more cautious about moving forward with IPOs compared to Morgan Stanley. But I think it's time for them to pull the trigger on some of these deals. So confidential filing this week, Navan looking pretty good for 2025 IPO. Company was valued at $9 billion in October 2022, now looking like a $6 billion valuation in the secondary markets on Caplight. Stay tuned for that one. Next on our list, number 6, is Cerebras. Cerebras has been falling down the list. I don't want to spend too much time on this one because we've talked about it so much in the past, but they filed for an IPO on September 30th, 2024, ran into some government issues with something called Cepheus. It had concerns about its relationships in the UAE. One of the investors of Cerebras, it was a big investor, and they're also a big customer of the company. And so there were some red flags in the S1 filing. We learned on March 31st, 25, that Cerebras was beyond all this government stuff. And then 2 days later, the tariff announcement happened. But the last we heard about Cerebras was a comment by CEO Andrew Feldman. And this report came out on May 15th. And he's now saying that their aspiration is to IPO in 2025. That's not a word that makes me confident about this IPO in 2025, aspiration. But we really want to see this one go public. It's an AI pure play hardware company, competes against NVIDIA, and there's a huge appetite for this kind of company. I'd like to see better messaging from the CEO, and I'd like to see an updated S1 filing. I'm holding out hope for this one for 2025, but I'm starting to get the sense that maybe something's wrong in the background and it's not going to happen. Fingers crossed, Cerebras, we see that in 2025. Next on the list, number 7, is Netskope. Netskope is a cloud-native security company, SaaS, that offers cybersecurity solutions to enterprise organizations. It's the leader in Secure Access Service Edge, or SASE, solutions. And Netskope may be the one I'm most confident about this year. We got an article back in October of 2024. It said Netskope plans to IPO in 2025. That came from the Wall Street Journal, very reputable source. And the next we heard about this deal was in March of 2025, March 20th. CEO Sanjay Berry did an interview with CRN, that's a website, and he said, quote, assuming the market conditions are right for that, we do plan to go public late this year, 2025. So we have a story telling us that they're thinking about going forward with their IPO. Then we get a story with the CEO on the record saying he's looking to do it this year if market conditions hold, which they are. The IPO window is open, market's at all-time highs. And then to cap it off, we get an exclusive from Reuters that said cybersecurity provider Netskope taps Morgan Stanley for its IPO. That was on May 28th of this year. And we know Morgan Stanley is really pushing for IPOs. They think it's time. They've proved it's time with some of their previous clients. The Reuters article says that Netskope is aiming to go public as early as the third quarter of this year. 2 sources confirm that. This deal looks like it's going to go through. Netskope was last valued at $7.5 billion in July 2021. It's now around $4.5 billion, so not a huge IPO, but following in the footsteps of a Rubrik, this could be a deal that people pay attention to. It's now surpassed $500 million in annual recurring revenue. That's a pretty good number for a SaaS, so Netskope, keep an eye out for that one, possibly in the next few months. Number 8 on our list is Medline. Medline is a healthcare supply company. It competes with companies like Cardinal Health, McKesson, and Owens & Minor. Those are all public companies. And this company has been around since the 1960s. It was actually public for about 5 years in the 1970s. It's gone private. It went private years ago. It's family owned. They brought in some private equity investors. And so those private equity investors were likely brought in to take it public for this family who runs the company, who's owned this company for all these years. So this is a slightly different type of company. It's family owned. It's got private equity investors instead of venture capital. And so these guys aren't going to be in as much of a hurry, but they do want to IPO at a time when they can max out their investment, max out the dollars. And so all-time highs is a really good time to do that. They filed confidentially in December. And that follows a story that said they were aiming to raise about $5 billion at a $50 billion valuation. Confidential filing came out. We didn't hear very much more, but I did find this article from the FT that was talking about Klarna and StubHub and Chime and Circle and all those companies. They actually did mention Medline here, and they had a source that said Medline was pausing the deal indefinitely. Now, indefinitely is a bit of a scary word, but if the market's at all-time highs, there's an appetite for IPOs, the window's open, I think there's a good chance that this company moves forward. These are private equity guys. They want to max out their investment. So keep an eye out for Medline. It's not an exciting startup like some of the other ones on our list, but a $50 billion IPO, that could be one that retail investors get access to. Number 9 on our list is another one of these kind of boring private equity held companies. It's called Genesys. SYS at the end of the Genesys. It's a cloud customer service SaaS. So they help enterprises combine their text messaging, phone call service, and any way that they provide customer service to a customer, sort of integrates all that. And I'm sure they add some AI piece to it. They filed confidentially in October of 2024. And the deal is valued about $20 billion. They want to raise $2 billion. We don't hear a lot about this company. $20 billion is big, but we did hear from Corey Weinberg from The Information. Now, those articles are behind a paywall, but I'm on his email list, so I heard about this news. It said that they were delaying the deal, and that was as of March 5th, due to the volatility that was happening at the time. Again, as the volatility subsides, the tariff fear dissipates, and the market's at all-time highs, and you have some private equity investors that are share owners, we expect to start seeing some movement on this one. Investors include Hellman and Friedman, Permira, and TCV. There's some venture capital investors as well. BlackRock's involved, Zoom, ServiceNow, Salesforce Ventures. So not an exciting company, not an exciting name to it. Genesys, kind of easy to forget, but could be a $20 billion IPO that we see in the second half of 2025. Number 10, rounding out the top list here, is Discord. Discord is an online community platform, social media network. It's a place where video gamers started to hang out and chat with each other, but a lot of businesses use it, sort of like Slack, but on the internet and open to more people. Discord, we learned in early March that it was having talks with banks about a potential IPO. That quickly moved to hiring JP Morgan and Goldman Sachs. Looks like Goldman Sachs is going to lead that one. And then in April, we learned, and this is a big deal for this company, that the CEO is stepping down. His name is Jason Citron. And there was a discussion with CEO Jason Citron on the Harry Stebbings podcast, 20VC, back in November of 2024. And Jason, you kind of got the sense he didn't want to be a public CEO. He wanted to build software, hang out with his friends online, play video games. That a public company wasn't really his thing, although he said he would do it. But we learned in April that he stepped down. They appointed a guy named Humam Sakhnini as the CEO, and Jason is going to remain part of the company, part of the culture. He's going to remain on the board of directors. But this seems like his way of stepping aside and letting a professional CEO come in to take this thing public. I'm hopeful with Discord. In that interview with Harry Stebbings, he talked about how his investors wanted liquidity and he wanted to give it to them. And so an IPO is the best way to do that. What we hope is to see maybe some customers of Discord get a chance to invest in the IPO, or maybe some of the active users, similar to what Reddit did last year. Reddit offered IPO shares to their active users. So maybe there's an opportunity for customers to participate in this one. Certainly, we hope to get some opportunities to invest through a Robinhood or SoFi. It does seem like a company that would be interested in having its customers and its users as long-term shareholders. I do think that's going to happen by the end of the year at the pace they're moving and the way that CEOs have been talking, and the fact that the window's open and markets are at all-time highs. So that rounds out our top 10 list of upcoming IPOs. And again, I update this list constantly based on news articles that I get in my alerts and learn about online. So go to accessipos.com, and up at the top there's an upcoming IPOs page, or you can search for Access IPOs, upcoming IPOs, and you'll find it. There's a list of 70 companies on there, and really the top 20 are the ones that are most likely to move forward, or ones that we've gotten some recent news on. Now, sometimes we get news from a company, then crickets. We don't really hear anything else from them again. A CEO might say, hey, we're thinking about IPOing in 2023, and then 2025 comes along and it doesn't happen. So there are a handful of these companies that I'm going to talk about next, that I'm calling IPO Crickets. They've talked about an IPO soon. We haven't heard anything yet. Maybe they're in a silent period. Maybe they're second guessing what they're going to do. The first one is Clario. Clario made our list of top 10 back in December, January for 2025. It's a drug trial software company. They filed confidentially in June of 2024. I got a tip from a reader that said he knew about this one and it was likely moving forward in 2025, likely in the first half of 2025. But since that article and since that guy told me about this, haven't heard anything about it. So we're waiting on Clario. It's not a super exciting company, but it's a SaaS and it's generating annual revenue of $1.1 billion. That's not small. Number 2 is Airtable. Airtable is one of these cloud collaboration software companies, a SaaS. Its main product is a spreadsheet-like tool that allows users to create, organize, and manage team data. It's got some big name investors like Benchmark and Coatue, JP Morgan, Salesforce, and Ashton Kutcher. A lot of high-profile names invested in this company. We got an article in November. It says Airtable has turned cash flow positive and eyes an IPO. That came from Kevin McLaughlin at The Information. It's behind a paywall. I don't have a subscription to The Information. So all we have is that headline. It says it's now growing at a 30% annual rate, has turned cash flow positive, and it's eyeing an IPO. And since then, haven't gotten anything else. It made my list of top 10 based on that article. Cash flow positive, growing at 30%. It definitely fits the mold of what you want to see from an IPO. It's Series F in 2021, valued the company at about $12 billion. Secondary marketplaces showing it at about a $4 billion valuation. So it's going to be a down round IPO if it happens, although that growing 30% maybe will help push it up a little bit more. Airtable, number 2 on our cricket list. Number 3 is 1Password. Company is Agile Bytes, but everyone knows it as 1Password. This is a password management company, SaaS, that works both on your computer and on your phone. We learned in November that 1Password was interviewing banks for a possible 2025 IPO. And that was a Bloomberg article from Katie Roof. And Katie Roof is one of our most reliable reporters. So I expect this one to happen. But since that November story, if you're not on Katie's Bloomberg alert email list, when she publishes an article, it comes to your inbox. She gets tons of scoops, very active on Twitter, X as well. So I'm watching for 1Password, but it's been very quiet recently. Next one on our list is Quantinuum. So Quantinuum is a subsidiary of Honeywell. It's a quantum computing company, and quantum computing isn't quite ready for the big time yet. It's technology that's under construction, but we got an article in July of 2024 that says Honeywell weighs a Quantinuum IPO at a $10 billion valuation. So this is a subsidiary. It'd be more like a spinoff, but they're calling it an IPO in this article. Back then it said the firm had held early talks with banks on a potential IPO. Listing in the US could take place as soon as next year. That would be 2025. But I haven't heard anything since. It's on all of my alert emails and I monitor all these IPO radar companies. Quantinuum has not come up in the context of a potential IPO. One way to play this quantum name is possibly to own Honeywell. I don't know if they'll spin off shares or how it'll be handled from a tax perspective, but Quantinuum is a company that we'd like to see IPO, but so far. Next up on our list is Cross River Bank, and I don't get a lot of news from this company at all. The last news story I have on my website is from October 26, 2023, and the article says, Cross River Bank eyeing potential IPO in 2025, CEO says. So that's not a story that came from a reporter. This is straight from the mouth of CEO Gillis Gade. And he said that at a Money 2020 conference in Las Vegas 2023. Sometimes I think these CEOs regret what they say about IPOs. They maybe don't understand how complicated it is or the pushback they're going to get from investors, bankers, and whoever. But he said it apparently on stage, and there was a reporter, I guess, from Ion Analytics, Carlos Martinez, who picked up the story. Backers of this deal would include Eldridge and Andreessen Horowitz, T. Rowe Price, Whale Rock, and Hanaco Ventures. Cross River Bank is a fintech that helps other fintechs with banking. It's a banking as a service company, and it's located across the river from Manhattan, and that's how it gets its name. But not hearing much about this company, even though they said that IPO is in the pipeline. It's been on my upcoming IPOs list for a long time, but it keeps moving down because this IPO seems less likely every time I update the list. And last on our list, Neo4j is a graph database technology SaaS. Graph database takes unstructured data and makes it very visual. Data analysts like it a lot. Now, going back to February 15th of 2024, we got an article from Bloomberg that said Neo4j is planning an IPO on the NASDAQ. Its largest owner, Greenbridge, says. So Greenbridge spilled the beans, I guess. Maybe they're regretting that statement. We got another article from Bloomberg, this one on November 19th. It was kind of a weird story. It says Neo4j, a supplier of graph database, is preparing to follow in customer Klarna Bank's footsteps to go public in the US. Klarna is a Swedish company. It's going public in the US. And I guess Neo4j was founded in Sweden. It's now based in Silicon Valley. Everyone is looking for these early kind of frontrunners and opening up the tech IPO window, says Neo4j's Chief Executive Officer Emil Ephraim in an interview. I'm focused to make sure that we are IPO able and that we have the ability to go public when the time is right. The time is right now. You had one of your investors talking about the IPO. You've mentioned you're waiting for Klarna. I guess that's a good reason to root for the Klarna IPO, because if they IPO, then I guess Neo4j is going to follow in their footsteps. But since that statement from Neo4j's CEO, haven't heard very much. So that's all for our IPO Cricket list. I just want to close out with looking at the 2026 pipeline. And I got to tell you, there's definitely some companies that are looking likely for 2026 IPOs. They're saying they're ready for an IPO in 2026. Of course, we know that they could turn into a cricket company. They could get acquired, or they could just disappear and decide not to IPO. But we're still tracking them. And a few of them are pretty high profile and seem convinced that they're moving forward. And I think they have good reason to. The first one is Kraken. Kraken is a cryptocurrency exchange. And after watching Circle, hopefully we get Gemini coming up soon, Kraken would be the next one to move forward. It's another fintech. They are a crypto exchange. They've also added stock trading to the platform. There was a Bloomberg article that said crypto exchange Kraken is preparing for an IPO in 2026. There you have it. They're also looking to maybe borrow some money. We prefer the IPO. Another one that we've seen some movement on is Fervo Energy. Fervo Energy is geothermal. That's a great alternative to fossil fuels. Google has a partnership with this company out in Nevada. They're building a giant geothermal plant. This is where they inject water into the ground. The water heats up, it builds steam, runs a turbine. Got an article that says they've secured some new financing recently, but on March 13th, just this year, Axios broke the story that Fervo is moving toward an IPO despite Trump's climate storm. Yeah, maybe the time isn't ripe for green, climate, energy type stocks, but that's not stopping Fervo. There's a quote in the story that says next year they could be a multi-billion-dollar company, the source says. There's a huge hunger in the public markets right now to figure out how are we going to solve the energy power demand story. And of course, there's nuclear that's making a resurgence, and we have solar and wind, but those aren't really turning out to be great investments. Possibly geothermal, possibly next-gen nuclear. And then downstream, we're hoping some of the fusion technology comes through, and we're hoping some of those startups start generating revenue and IPOing in the 2030s. Another possible IPO in 2026 is Deel, D-E-E-L. This is an HR SaaS, and they're actually more famous now for getting into a corporate espionage controversy with Rippling suing them. CEO disappeared overseas. He's been served with the papers now. Back in February, CNBC reported that Deel was preparing for an IPO as soon as 2026. That was before they got sued by Rippling. Seems less likely now, but still on our radar. If they can clean up the lawsuit and they're still moving forward with the IPO, 2026 is definitely possible for Deel. It's a fast-growing SaaS, and that's the kind of company that public investors want to see. Got two more here. One we just learned about this week, and it would have made the IPO radar storyline if I was doing that this week. Cue the little swirly radar thing. And this one is Lime. Lime is the scooter company, or as they like to say, they're a micro-mobility company helping people complete that last mile in their communities. A lot of these companies have these electric scooters. Lime has been around for a long time. They've been wanting to IPO for a long time. We found out on June 24th, just a couple days ago, Lime has hired banks for a US IPO. That was a Reuters story from Echo Wayne and Interban Sen. In the timeline, mentioned the article, is 2026. So it seems like a pretty likely candidate. It's been talking about it for a while. Hasn't quite pulled that trigger yet. Not a huge company, valued somewhere in the $500 million to $1 billion. Watch for Lime in the coming 12 to 18 months. And finally, I'm going to leave everybody with an IPO wish list radar, hopeful for 2026, because I know everyone loves this company. It's getting a lot of hype right now. It's got a very rambunctious CEO. Company's worth more than $30 billion, and it's in the defense technology space, drones, automation, robot warfighting, and that's Anduril. There are no news stories to really indicate that the company is planning a 2026 IPO, but I think the conviction in Palmer Luckey's voice in the latest CNBC interview, they were on the top of the CNBC 50s disruptor list a few weeks ago, and I did a podcast episode on it. I think that was episode 14. His conviction seemed very strong that he wants U.S. taxpayers to be able to invest in his company if he's going to be getting large government contracts. I'm going to go out on a limb here and say I think they're going to IPO in 2026. If he really wants retail investors to be a part of the company and the growth story, he's going to get this thing public before it's worth 100 or 200 billion, if it ever gets there. But we want to get in on the ground floor, and an IPO is a way to do that. If Anduril were to IPO in 2026, it would be a blockbuster, and it could really ignite the IPO space for those wish list companies like the Databricks and SpaceX, Starlink, xAI, OpenAI, Anthropic, these really big companies that are holding back but have very large valuations. So that's my top prediction for 2026. We'll see if I still feel that way at the beginning of 2026 in January when I do my next update on this. It's kind of low down on my list of upcoming IPOs, but it's one of my most hopeful. It's one of my readers' most hopeful. I get emails about Anduril. And of course, Anduril is a holding in the Fundrise Innovation Fund as well. So it's a company that retail investors can participate in, and that's what Palmer Luckey wants. He wants U.S. retail investors to be able to share in the growth with his company. That's all for the show this week. If you like what you're seeing here, hit that subscribe button or follow or like wherever you consume this information. Go to my website and use the search button to look for any of the companies that I've talked about today. You can also go to that upcoming IPOs list. And if you're interested in more detailed stories about the various companies on the IPO radar list, which expands to about 150 beyond just the ones I've talked about today, join the Access Club. That's our Patreon membership group where I share a weekly update on the news. I share deal alerts on what's happening in the pre-IPO secondary marketplaces. And we talk about IPO allocations and what's happening inside the S1 filings when they come out. So go to patreon.com/accessipos to join. It's only $5 at the baseline membership level. I'm Craig from accessipos.com. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week. This video is not a recommendation to buy or sell any startups mentioned. Pre-IPO and IPO investing involves significant risk. Conduct due diligence by reading the SEC S1 filings before participating in IPOs. Do not invest in IPOs with money you cannot afford to lose. Thanks for watching.